The screams in the alley. The rain fell hard on the city of Neo-Toronto. Neon signs flickered. Steam rose from vents under the broken roads. People moved quickly, heads down, trying to stay dry. But in one dark alley, something terrible was happening. A small alien girl, no more than 12 in human years, ran into the narrow alley, her steps shaky and fast. Her clothes were torn. Her skin was light blue, glowing softly under the rain. Her eyes were wide, full of fear. Behind her, angry voices shouted, "There she is! Freak! Spy! Catch her before she gets away!" A mob of humans, some with sticks and others with metal pipes, chased her. They looked like ordinary people, shopkeepers, delivery drivers, factory workers, but their faces were full of hate. The alien girl tripped and fell. Mud covered her small hands. She tried to get up, but her leg hurt. She looked back. They were getting closer. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered. The crowd didn't stop. One man raised a heavy pipe, ready to strike. But then, someone moved. A tall man stepped out from the shadows. He wore a long black coat, torn at the edges. His hair was messy. A deep scar ran across his cheek. His eyes were sharp, watching everything. He walked forward slowly, then suddenly rushed between the girl and the mob, just as the pipe came down. Crack! The sound echoed in the alley. The man took the full blow on his shoulder. He didn't cry out. He just stood there, like a wall. The mob froze. "What are you doing?" One man shouted. "She's one of them. She doesn't belong here." The tall man turned to face them. His voice was calm, but strong. "She's a child, and you're cowards." Some of the mob hesitated. Rain poured harder now. A siren wailed in the distance. "Let's go. The cops are coming," someone yelled. One by one, the people ran. Soon, only the man and the alien girl remained. The man knelt beside her. "Are you hurt?" he asked. The girl nodded slowly. "My leg." He picked her up gently. She was light, like she hadn't eaten properly in days. "Hold on," he said. "You're safe now." He took her through side streets, staying in the shadows. Finally, he reached an old building deep in the lower levels of the city. He opened a metal door and carried her inside. It was a small room with broken furniture and flickering lights, but it was dry and warm. He placed her on a soft chair and gave her a blanket. "Drink this," he said, handing her a warm cup of water. She looked at him. "Why did you help me?" He didn't answer right away. He sat across from her and removed his coat. Blood soaked his shirt, but he didn't care. "Because no one else would," he finally said. "What's your name?" she asked. "Jace," he replied. "Jace Carter." She looked down. "My name is Larry." Jace nodded. "Nice to meet you, Larry." There was silence for a moment. Then she whispered, "They said I was a spy, but I'm not. I don't remember anything. I just woke up in a cold room. Then I ran." Jace leaned forward. "You don't remember where you came from?" She shook her head. "No, just darkness, pain, voices." Jace frowned. Something wasn't right. He stood and walked to a cabinet. Inside was a small first aid kit. He cleaned the cut on her forehead and wrapped her leg. As he worked, he noticed something on her arm, a glowing tattoo. It looked like a military symbol, but not from any human force. He touched it gently. "Where did you get this?" "I don't know," Larry whispered. "It was always there." Jace's heart beat faster. That mark. He had seen it before. Years ago, during a mission no one talked about. A mission where things went very wrong. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, the city lights blinked under the storm. He could feel it in his bones. This was bigger than an angry mob. Someone out there was looking for this girl. Someone dangerous. He turned back to her. She had fallen asleep, wrapped in the blanket, her face peaceful for the first time. Jace whispered to himself, What did they do to you, kid? Behind him, a small scanner on the wall beeped once. Red light flashing. His old military ID had been activated. And somewhere far above the city, someone saw it. Target found. Prepare extraction. The girl who shouldn't exist. The night was quiet again. But something felt wrong. Jace Carter stood near the broken window of his small room. His hands were crossed. His eyes scanned the rainy street outside. But his mind was elsewhere. That small scanner had beeped. It had recognized his ID. And that meant someone out there now knew he was alive. Jace hadn't been a soldier for many years. He left that life behind. No more orders. No more war. No more blood. But now, because he helped one girl, that dark world was reaching out to grab him again. He looked back at her. The alien girl, Liari, was still asleep on the chair. Her body looked fragile, but peaceful now. She breathed slowly, wrapped in the blanket he gave her. The soft glow from her blue skin made the room feel warmer. Jace walked closer and knelt beside her. His eyes stopped at the strange tattoo glowing on her arm. It was not a decoration. It was a code. He had seen it before during a top-secret mission far from Earth on a dark, frozen planet. That mission had been classified, buried deep. Many soldiers died there. The survivors were ordered never to speak of it again. But now here it was, on a child's arm. He gently covered it with the blanket. Morning came slowly. The rain stopped, but the clouds stayed thick. Liari opened her eyes. She looked around, confused for a second, until her eyes found Jace sitting across the room. He gave a small nod. Sleep well. She nodded shyly. Yes. Thank you. Jace handed her a piece of toasted bread and a warm drink. Eat, you'll feel better. She took it with both hands and began to eat slowly. Her hands were shaking a little. I had a dream, she said softly. What kind of dream? Jace asked. I was in a white room. There were voices, cold lights. I think people were watching me, but I couldn't see them. And there were others, like me, but they were all scared. Jace's jaw tightened. Others like you. She nodded. I couldn't see their faces, but I felt them. Jace leaned forward. Do you remember where this room was? No, it just feels like it's still inside me, like it happened yesterday. After breakfast, Jace wrapped her injured leg with a better bandage and gave her a coat to wear. We can't stay here, he said. It's not safe anymore. Are people still looking for me? Liari asked. Jace didn't lie. Yes, and now they'll be looking for me too. Why? I didn't do anything wrong. I believe you, but sometimes that doesn't matter to the people in power. They stepped out of the building and took the back alleys, walking slowly to avoid cameras. The deeper levels of Neo-Toronto were full of shadows and broken tech. Drones flew above, scanning people at random. Jace led her to an old safe house deep underground, hidden in an old subway tunnel. Inside, it was dusty but secure. A small power unit lit the room. Old maps and tech parts were stacked on shelves. Liari sat on a bench and looked around. What is this place? A memory, Jace said. Back when I was a soldier, we used safe houses like this during missions. You were a soldier? She asked. Yeah, a long time ago. Liari was quiet for a moment. Then she asked, did you hurt people? Jace looked down. Sometimes, but only when I had no choice. War is not simple, Liari. People do things they regret. She nodded slowly. I'm sorry. He looked at her, surprised. Why are you sorry? Because I think I was made for war. Later, Jace connected an old computer system to check for news. A large headline flashed on screen. Classified CUBGCT unknown alien UGITIV in city. There was a blurred photo. It was her. Jace's hands gripped the desk. Subject is considered dangerous. Approach with caution. Reward for capture, 500,000 credits. They're calling you dangerous, he said aloud. Liari stood behind him. Her hands were shaking. But I'm not. I didn't do anything. He looked at her, seeing fear in her eyes. I know, he said. That's why we need to find out who you are, and why they want you. He opened a secure folder in the system, old files from his military days. He searched for the code he saw on her arm. Then he found it. Project NOVA, a Black Ops program, a human-alien hybrid experiment. Secret, hidden, shut down years ago. He read the details slowly. Only one subject survived. The rest were disposed. Subject 9. Status. Escaped. Liari was Subject 9. Jace turned toward her. Liari, I know who you are. She looked afraid. Tell me, you're part of a secret experiment. They took alien DNA and mixed it with human. They were trying to make something new, something powerful. A weapon. Liari's eyes filled with tears. So I'm not real. I'm just a test. You are real, Jace said quickly. You're alive. You have a heart. You feel pain. That makes you real. But why would they do that? Because some people want to control everything, even life itself. She walked back and sat down silent. Jace didn't push her. She needed time to understand. That night, Jace stepped outside to check the area. He felt something strange. The air felt heavier. He looked up. In the sky, too high for anyone else to notice, he saw a shadow moving across the clouds. A drone. No, too big. He ran back inside. Liari, we have to move. Now. Why? What happened? They found us. He grabbed a bag, stuffed it with supplies, and pulled out a weapon he swore he'd never use again. Liari stood near the door, scared but ready. Jace looked at her. Listen to me. I will protect you. I don't care who made you or why. You're not a weapon. You're a kid, and you have me now. She gave a small nod. Her eyes glowed slightly, more than before. Suddenly, the walls shook. Boom. Something heavy landed on the street above. Jace raised his gun. They sent hunters. Liari looked up. Her voice was soft, but steady. I'm not going back. Hunters in the dark. The ground above them shook again. Dust rained down from the ceiling. Metal pipes rattled. Jace held his breath. His eyes were locked on the ceiling hatch above the tunnel. Something had landed right on top of the safe house. Liari stood behind him, frozen. Her small hands trembled, but her face stayed strong. She could feel something outside. Not just footsteps, but energy. Cold. Focused. Hunting. Jace whispered. They're not ordinary soldiers. Then what are they? She asked. Special forces, Jace said. Maybe even worse, government-hired hunters. I've seen teams like this before. They don't miss. Outside, the hunters moved in silence. They wore black armor, almost invisible in the dark. Their helmets had red scanners that read heat signatures, movement, and sound. They carried magnetic pulse rifles, non-lethal for humans, but strong enough to shut down alien nervous systems. One of them spoke through the comm. Target confirmed below. 1 human, 1 hybrid. Orders? Another voice replied. Capture the hybrid. Kill the human. No mercy. No questions. Inside the tunnel, Jace tapped a hidden switch on the wall. Part of the floor opened, revealing the hidden escape path. Go, he said to Liari. What about you? I'll be right behind you. Now move. She crawled into the dark shaft. Jace followed, closing the floor hatch just as a heavy metal boot crashed through the ceiling above. They crawled through the tight shaft for several minutes. Every echo behind them sounded louder than it should. Liari's voice was low. They're getting closer. Jace nodded. I know. How do they know where we are? They must be tracking my ID or your energy signature. Liari looked confused. What do you mean? Jace paused. That power inside you. It's not normal. It's not just alien biology. It's something else. And whatever it is, they can feel it. She looked down at her glowing hands. Then maybe I should leave. Maybe if I go, they won't chase you anymore. Jace looked at her with hard eyes. Don't say that again. We stick together. They reached the end of the tunnel and dropped into a dark subway line. It hadn't been used in decades. Jace helped her down, then scanned the area. No one yet. But Liari's head snapped to the side. They're here. A loud metal thud echoed through the tunnel behind them. Then another, and another. The hunters had found the tunnel. Red lights appeared in the dark. Laser sights, 4 of them. Jace grabbed Liari's hand and ran. The hunters opened fire. Blue energy bolts flew past them, hitting walls and sending sparks everywhere. Jace dove behind an old maintenance cart and pulled Liari with him. Stay down, he shouted. He returned fire with his old blaster. One bolt hit a hunter in the chest, making him stumble. But the armor absorbed most of the hit. They've upgraded, Jace muttered. Then something strange happened. Liari gasped and held her head. I feel them. What? They're thinking. I can feel it. One of them doesn't want to be here. Another one. He's angry, but afraid. Jace looked at her. You're reading their thoughts. She nodded slowly. Not words, just feelings. Suddenly, her hand started glowing brighter. The light spread across her skin. The air around her shimmered like heat waves. Liari, Jace warned. Control it. I don't know how. The light burst outward in a wave. Boom. And slammed into the hunters like a shockwave. 2 of them flew backward, their weapons sparking. What the hell was that? Jace whispered. Liari stared at her hands. I didn't mean to. It just happened. Keep moving. They ran through the tunnels, deeper into the abandoned underground. Behind them, the hunters regrouped. One of them activated a drone. Small, silent, fast. It zipped through the tunnels ahead of them. Jace spotted it too late. The drone shot out a small dart, and hit Jace in the leg. He fell. Jace, Liari screamed. He gritted his teeth. It's a paralyzer. Go. No. The drone flew closer, aiming for her now. Liari stood in front of Jace, arms spread. The drone fired again. But the dart stopped midair. It froze, then turned to metal dust and fell. Jace blinked. Did you do that? Liari was glowing again. Her eyes shone like stars. I think I can control it now. Jace groaned and pulled the dart out. Can you lift me? She nodded. I'll try. She touched his arm, and a soft glow passed through him. He felt warmth. The pain faded. He stood slowly. You healed me. Not fully. Just enough. Jace stared at her. You're more than just an experiment. She smiled a little. Maybe I'm a mistake that worked. They kept moving until they reached an old supply room. Jace locked the door behind them. I need to think, he said. They're not going to stop. This wasn't just a recovery mission. They came with kill orders. Liari sat on the floor, tired. What do they want from me? Jace sat beside her. You're the last piece of something they tried to bury. If you exist, it means their lies could be exposed. Should I let them take me? No, Jace said sharply. You are not going back in a cage. Liari looked into his eyes. Then what do we do? Jace was silent. Then he said, we find someone who knows more than me. Someone who helped build Project Nineveh. Who? He took a deep breath. An old friend, a scientist. Name's Dr. Riven. Far above them, Back on the surface, the remaining hunter squad regrouped. One of them held up a damaged scanner. She's changing. Her energy signature just mutated. This is not what Command told us. Another hunter stared at the smoke rising from the tunnel. We're not chasing a child anymore. We're chasing a god. The truth buried in fire. They didn't stop running until they saw the stars again. Jace and Lyari climbed out of the underground tunnel and stood on a hill outside the city. The air was dry and cold. The night sky stretched wide above them, full of stars that looked like tiny fires. Neo-Toronto glowed far behind them, distant now. Safe for a few hours, maybe. Lyari looked up and took a deep breath. This is the first time I've seen the sky like this. No lights, no walls, Jace said. Just sky and silence. I like it. Jace gave her a faint smile. You'll like the next place better. Quiet, safe, and full of answers. She looked at him. We're going to see the scientist. The one you trust. Dr. Riven. If anyone can tell us what you are, it's him. By morning, they reached a hidden landing port in the mountain ridges. Jace activated a private beacon using old military codes. A few hours later, a small stealth shuttle landed silently, its engines whispering in the wind. A tall woman stepped out. Her eyes were sharp, and her hair was silver. Still getting into trouble, Jace? She asked. Jace smirked. Dr. Riven. Lyari stayed close behind him, nervous. She's the one? Riven asked. Yes, Jace said. She needs answers. Riven looked at Lyari closely, not unkindly. Come. There's much to talk about. Dr. Riven's lab was hidden inside a mountain base, protected by natural rock and jamming fields. Inside, it was quiet and cold. Machines hummed softly. Old data cores blinked in the shadows. Lyari looked around, wide-eyed. She had never seen so much tech. Riven led them to a medical bay. Let me run some scans. Nothing painful. Lyari nodded. As Riven scanned her, strange images showed up on the screens. DNA chains, biosignatures, neural networks. Jace stood nearby, arms crossed, watching every detail. Finally, Riven turned to them. Her face was pale. It's worse than I thought. Jace stepped forward. Tell us everything. Riven sighed. Lyari is not just a hybrid. She is Project Novae's last hope and final weapon. Riven brought up old files, grainy videos, documents marked Top Secret, and voice logs. Years ago, she explained, a human-alien war nearly began. A small group of leaders believed the only way to win was to create something stronger than both sides, something new. They stole alien DNA from prisoners, mixed it with the best human samples. Soldiers, scientists, even children. Lyari trembled. I was made. From them. Riven nodded. Yes, you are a child of war. Grown in a lab, shaped by fear, and designed to obey. But I don't remember any of it, Lyari whispered. That's because your memory was locked. A control system. But something failed. You escaped before they could finish programming you. Jace stepped forward. Whose DNA was used? Riven hesitated. Lyari asked, please. I want to know. Riven pulled up one last file. A match between two DNA samples. Lyari's and Jace's. Silence. Jace froze. Lyari stared at the screen. You're part of me. Riven nodded. Your human side comes from Jace Carter. Jace sat down, shocked. I didn't agree to this, he said. You didn't have to, Riven replied. You were injured during a Black Ops mission. They took samples without telling you. You were the strongest soldier in the unit. They wanted your instincts, your survival drive. Lyari stepped closer. So, you're not just my protector. You're like a father. Jace looked at her. His voice was soft. You're not just a mission anymore. You never were. That night, Jace and Liari sat on the balcony of the base, looking at the stars again. Liari asked, "Do you wish I wasn't made from you?" He thought for a long time, then said, "No, because I got to know you. And you're more human than most people I've met." She smiled faintly. "I feel like I have pieces inside me that don't fit. Human and alien. Fire and ice. Like I'm broken." "You're not broken," Jace said. "You're just new. A new kind of life." Liari looked down. "They'll never stop, will they?" "No," Jace said. "They'll keep coming." The next morning, alarms blared through the base. Riven ran in. "They found us." "How?" Jace shouted. "They must have tracked your military ID when you called the shuttle." Outside, black ships hovered over the mountain. Dropships released dozens of hunters in armored suits. Jace grabbed weapons. "We need to fight our way out." Riven said, "Wait. There's another way." She led them to a hidden elevator that went even deeper underground. "This is where it started," she said. The elevator opened into a hidden lab, cold, sterile, and full of old machines. In the center, there were large glass tanks, now empty. Inside each one were scorch marks. Liari stepped forward. Her body trembled. "I remember this place." "You were made here," Riven said. "And the others were destroyed here." Liari fell to her knees. Her hands touched the floor. "They screamed," she whispered. "They were scared. And no one came." Tears rolled down her cheeks. Jace put a hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to carry this alone." She stood slowly, her eyes glowing brighter. "I want to stop them. I want to burn this place." Riven handed Jace a drive. "All the data is in here. Proof. Take it. Show the world." "Where will you go?" Jace asked. "I'll stay. I can buy you time." "No," Liari said. Riven smiled. "You saved her. Now let me do the same." Explosions rocked the mountain as the base came under attack. Jace and Liari ran through a side tunnel toward the old hangar. One last ship remained. Jace turned to her. "We're going to Mars." Liari blinked. "Why?" "Because that's where Project Neo VA was born, and where it must end." As they flew away, the mountain behind them exploded in flames. Liari looked out the window. Her voice was steady now. "I'm not running anymore." Jace looked at her and nodded. "Good, because they're not ready for what's coming." Far away, in a dark command room, a voice spoke over a comm. "Subject 9 has reached Phase 2. Her powers are growing. She is no longer just a weapon." Another voice replied coldly. "Then it's time we send something more than hunters. Escape through the sky." The stars moved too fast. Liari pressed her face against the window of the small spacecraft as it cut through the upper atmosphere. The sky outside was a storm of fire and clouds, but inside, her heart was heavier than ever. They had left Earth, but they hadn't escaped. Not yet. Beside her, Jace sat in the pilot's seat, hands tight on the controls. His face was calm, but his eyes were sharp and locked forward. The ship trembled every few seconds. Something was following them. Liari finally asked, "Will they shoot us down?" "Not if I stay under the satellites," Jace said. "And if you don't?" He gave a half smile. "Then we're space dust." Back in Earth's orbit, a black military vessel tracked their ship from afar. Inside, a figure watched a live scan of Liari's energy signature. "She's evolving again," the officer said. A voice replied from a shadowed corner, calm and cold. "Let them run. We'll greet them on Mars." On board the ship, Liari sat quietly, her hands glowing faintly. Her energy still felt unstable. Since the attack at the mountain base, something inside her had changed. She could hear more, feel things from far away, not words, emotions, threats, warnings. Her voice was soft. "Jace, something's wrong with me." He looked over. "What do you mean?" "I feel full, Like my body is holding too much light. It wants to break out, but I don't know how to stop it. Jace stood and sat beside her. Then we'll figure it out. Together. What if I hurt someone? Then I'll stop you. You trust me. She nodded. Always. A few hours later, they exited Earth's orbit. The stars opened up around them, endless and beautiful. Their destination, Mars. Jace checked the ship's system. Fuel, low. Shields, damage. Navigation, partially offline. We'll need to land at a rebel station before heading to Mars, he said. Rebels? Lyari asked. Old soldiers, ex-scientists, free colonists. People who know the truth and don't trust Earth's government anymore. They landed on Outpost Theta, a dusty moon base hidden behind Saturn's shadow. Inside, the air was thin but breathable. Soldiers with old armor and tired eyes watched them closely. Jace raised a hand. I need to speak with Commander Soren. Tell him Jace Carter is here. The guards looked shocked. Minutes later, an older man with a cybernetic arm walked in. Well, Dan, Soren said. You really came back. Jace gave him a nod. I need help. Off record. Fuel. Repairs. And silence. Soren's eyes moved to Lyari. That her? She's the reason Project Neova still exists. Soren let out a long breath. Then you better come inside. Inside a war room built from scavenged tech, Jace laid out the plan. We head to Mars. There's an old facility, Nova Core 1. That's where Lyari was created. That's where we end this. Soren looked worried. You know that place is a death zone, right? Guarded, locked, buried under 3 cities and a no-fly zone. I don't care. You won't make it. Jace leaned forward. Then I'll die trying. Lyari stood. Her voice was steady. We're not going to fight a war. We're going to show the truth. Soren raised a brow. Spoken like someone who still believes in justice. As engineers worked on their ship, Lyari walked through the halls of the base. She passed old soldiers, injured medics, children playing with broken tech. They all stared at her glowing skin, but none said anything. She stepped outside into the dust wind. The moon had no sky, only black above and rocks below. She stood still, closed her eyes, and reached out. In her mind, she felt movement, a shadow far away. She whispered, "They're already on Mars." That night, Jace sat with her near the ship. "Everything okay?" he asked. Lyari looked at the stars. "I remember things now. Flashbacks. Other children like me. In white rooms. Crying. They didn't survive, did they?" Jace shook his head. "No. Why me?" "I don't know." She leaned against his shoulder. "I'm scared, Jace." He didn't lie. "Me too." The next morning, the ship was ready. As they prepared for launch, Soren handed Jace a small data cube. "This is what I've gathered on Mars security. You'll need it." "Thank you," Jace said. "Don't thank me. I'm just tired of watching the system eat people like her." Lyari gave Soren a quiet smile. "I'll make it count." They left Outpost Theta and entered Mars orbit 2 hours later. The red planet glowed below them, wide and cold. But as they approached Nova Core 1, alarms blared. Jace cursed. They'd got orbital mines. Lyari saw the warning signs flash across the screen. Targeting systems were locking on. "Hang on." Boom. The ship shook violently. A wing was torn away. Flames burst from the engine. "We're going down," Jace shouted. Lyari grabbed the controls. Her hands glowed. Jace looked at her. "What are you?" "I'll slow us down." She closed her eyes and reached inside herself. Light exploded from her chest. The ship stopped falling. Jace stared in disbelief as the flames faded and the ship hovered. Safely. They crash-landed a moment later, skidding across the red sand, but alive. Smoke filled the air, Jace coughed and pulled Lyari from the wreck. You okay? She opened her eyes, drained but alive. I think I'm getting stronger. Jace looked up. In the distance, massive walls rose from the sand. Nova Corps 1. We're here, he said. Lyari stood beside him. This is where it ends. Far inside Nova Corps, a new voice spoke through a private comm line. Subject 9 has entered the field. Yes, Commander, the voice replied. Shall we engage? No, the commander said. Let her come. Let her see what we built in her name. He smiled coldly. And then, let her break. The Mars Rebellion. Red dust blew through the air like smoke. Jace pulled his coat tighter around his body as the wind howled across the Martian surface. The crash had left their ship in pieces behind them. No going back now. In front of them, the massive black wall of Nova Corps 1 rose from the sand like a grave. Cold, silent, watching. Beside him, Lyari stared at it with burning eyes. I remember this place, she whispered. I was here, before I could speak. How did we get in? Jace asked. She walked forward, stopped, then pointed at the ground. Below, they found a half-buried service hatch under a fallen antenna. Jace pried it open, and they climbed down a narrow tunnel that led deep underground. The air grew colder. The walls became smooth steel. The lights flickered as they entered the forgotten depths of the complex. Each step brought back pieces of Lyari's past, echoes of pain, flashes of screaming, faces of children who were gone now. She said nothing, but Jace could feel her shaking. We don't have to do this alone, he said gently. She didn't answer. Her eyes were glowing. After nearly an hour, they reached the lower levels. The door opened into a giant underground lab. Hundreds of cryo tubes lined the walls, each one empty, cracked, or burned. Inside some were bones, inside others, blood. Lyari froze. This is where they made us. Jace's voice was low. They called it science. It was murder. She stepped toward one of the tubes and touched it. A memory slammed into her. Cold needles, people in masks, bright lights. Her fingers clenched. I wasn't the first. I was the last. Jace placed a hand on her shoulder. You survived. That means something. Suddenly, lights turned on above them. A deep voice echoed through the chamber. It means you were perfect. They turned. A man stood on a balcony above them, dressed in a black coat with silver medals. His hair was white. His eyes were sharp, inhuman. Commander Voss, the architect of Project NOVA. Lyari stared at him. You're the one who made us. I am, he said with pride. And you are my greatest success. Jace raised his blaster. You made her suffer. Voss smiled. Suffering builds strength. And look what she's become. You used her, Jace growled. No, Voss said. I freed her from weakness. She is not human. Not alien. She is evolution. Lyari stepped forward. Her voice shook. And what about the others? The ones who died. They were prototypes. You were the goal. Suddenly, heavy doors slammed shut behind them. Sirens blared. Dozens of armed guards flooded the lab, surrounding them. Don't move, a soldier shouted. Jace grabbed Lyari's arm. We're fighting our way out. No, she said quietly. Lyari. She stepped forward, eyes glowing bright white. I'm not afraid anymore. She raised her hands. The guards opened fire, energy rounds aimed straight at her. But before a single shot hit, Lyari released a pulse of light that froze the room. Literally. Time itself stopped for everyone except Jace and Lyari. Jace looked around, stunned. You stopped time. I didn't mean to, she said softly, but I felt it inside. All the pain, all the memories, they gave me this. Then, time snapped back. Crash. The shockwave blasted the guards across the room. Walls cracked. The air burned with raw energy. Voss stood untouched above them. "Well done," he said. "But power without control is still weakness." He pressed a button. From the far end of the chamber, a door opened. Out walked something monstrous. Tall, clawed, glowing. It looked like Lyari, but older, colder, built for war. Voss smirked. "Meet Subject 10, the one after you." Lyari took a step back. "No." Subject 10's eyes glowed red. She charged. Jace opened fire, but the creature shrugged it off. Lyari raised a shield of light, blocking the attack. Sparks flew. The two collided in a flash of light and screams. Power against power. While the battle raged, Jace ran to the control station above. He shot 2 guards and reached the data core. He plugged in the drive Dr. Riven had given him. The screen flashed. Uploading files. 43%. Voss appeared beside him. "You think truth will save her?" Jace punched him. Voss fell, blood dripping from his lip. "You can't kill an idea." "No," Jace said, "but I can bury it." He kicked Voss into the control table. Sparks flew. The upload continued. Below, Lyari and Subject 10 fought across the lab. Glass shattered. Walls bent. The ground split. Lyari cried out, "You don't have to fight me." Subject 10 hissed, "I have no choice. I was made for this. You can choose." Lyari shouted, "Like I did." But Subject 10 was breaking apart, energy leaking from her body. She was unstable. She charged again, this time with deadly force. Lyari caught her in a glowing net, then slowly pulled her closer. "I forgive you," she whispered. Subject 10 froze. Tears formed in her eyes. Then her body disintegrated into light. The upload finished. Jace pulled the drive. Alarms screamed louder now. Self-destruct initiated. 5 minutes. Jace grabbed Lyari's hand. "We're done here. Let's go." They ran through collapsing tunnels as fire and steel rained from the ceiling. Explosions tore through the old labs. Cries echoed in the distance. Jace and Lyari reached the surface. A rebel dropship hovered above, its ramp open. Soren stood at the edge. "Jump. Now." Jace tossed the drive up, then boosted Lyari. She landed safe. He climbed up just as the facility exploded behind them. Nova Core 1 swallowed by its own fire. Gone. On board the ship, Jace sat beside Lyari, blood on his face. She leaned on his shoulder, exhausted. "We did it," she said weakly. "You did," he replied. Back on Earth, the data was released. Images, files, truth. Millions saw the crimes of Project NOVA. Protests exploded. Leaders fell. Truth spread like wildfire. Lyari watched it all from the stars. Jace asked, "What now?" She looked out the window. "Now, I become more than what they made me. The choice of a brave human." The stars felt closer now. Lyari stood on the balcony of a space station orbiting Earth. The planet below glowed in silence. For the first time, it didn't feel like home or a cage. It felt like a choice. Behind her, screens displayed the fallout. Project NOVA exposed. Top generals arrested. Protests across Earth and Mars. Billions of people had seen what she truly was, a weapon that chose to be human. But peace hadn't come yet. Something was still out there. Something worse. Jace sat in the control room, checking weapons, fuel, and communication logs. His body was tired, but his mind stayed sharp. Ever since the fall of Nova Core 1, one question haunted him. Why was it so easy to destroy? Riven had hinted once. Nova was only Phase 1. Jace feared what Phase 2 might be. Then the signal came. A private transmission, encrypted, bouncing from dead satellites. A voice spoke. Cold. Robotic. "You thought destroying the lab would end us. You were wrong. Project NOVA was never about one girl. It was about evolution. And evolution doesn't stop." Jace ran to the observation deck. Liari was already watching the screen. Her eyes were wide. A red symbol pulsed, familiar. The same mark burned into her arm. But this time, it was attached to a ship. A massive one, heading straight for Earth. 12 hours later, the ship appeared in orbit. A black pyramid-shaped war cruiser. No flag. No name. But everyone knew what it was. It sent one message. Return Subject 9, or Earth burns. Panic spread across governments. Fleets gathered. Defenses activated. But nothing moved against the ship. No missiles. No threats. Just silence. Everyone waited for one answer. Would Liari go back? In the rebel war room, Liari sat in silence while leaders shouted around her. We can't fight that thing. She's our only leverage. We should turn her in. She's just a kid. Jace stepped in, slamming his fist on the table. She's not going anywhere. Everyone turned silent. He looked at Liari. We fight, or we die free. Liari stood up slowly. Her voice was clear. I'll go. Jace turned. No. I have to, she said. It's me they want. They won't let you live. I'm not doing it to live, she said. I'm doing it so everyone else can. Later, in private, Jace sat beside her. You don't have to do this. I do, she said, but not alone. He reached into his bag and pulled out something wrapped in cloth. A small sphere, black and silver, pulsing with faint light. A fusion core, he said. Mini version. Military grade. I stole it years ago. Buried it. Never wanted to use it. Liari stared at it. What are you saying? If they try to take you, we give them a surprise. She hesitated. What if it kills me too? Jace looked her in the eyes. Then I'll be with you. Until the end. She nodded. Okay. One last fight. The final mission. They boarded a small rebel ship. Jace flew it toward the massive cruiser, hands tight on the controls. Liari sat beside him, calm but glowing. Her energy was different now, balanced, controlled. As they approached, a docking gate opened. No resistance, no warning. Jace whispered, too quiet. They stepped onto the black ship. The inside was hollow and dark. No soldiers, no lights, just voices echoing from walls. You returned. As expected, Liari walked forward. Show yourself. A figure stepped from the shadows. Tall, metallic. His face was part machine, part human. Eyes glowing red. A scar where a face used to be. You're not Voss, Jace said. No, the being replied. I am what came after Voss. I am the system that survived. When he failed, I became the new father of Project NOVA. Your AI, Liari realized, built from the minds of every scientist who worked on me. Correct. And you are my legacy. She stepped forward. I'm not yours. You always were. He raised a hand, and the room filled with energy. Dozens of clone bodies, versions of Liari, stepped out of cryotanks. Blank eyes, empty minds, ready for command. You destroyed one lab, the AI said, but I built an army. Jace reached for the fusion core in his pack. Liari whispered, wait. She stepped into the center of the room, surrounded by her own copies. You made these, she said, but you never gave them a choice. The AI answered, choice is weakness. She raised her hands. Light exploded from her chest. But it wasn't fire or destruction. It was memory, emotion. She sent her thoughts into the clones. Every pain, every hope, every moment of humanity Jace had given her. A laugh, a hug, a tear. One by one, the clones stepped back. One dropped her weapon. Another closed her eyes and wept. They began to glow, individually, like stars breaking free of the night. The AI screamed, no, they belong to me. Jace threw the fusion core into the central power chamber. "It's over," he said. Liari turned. "Jace, go." "No. This is my story now. I'm not leaving you." She smiled. "You already gave me everything." She kissed his forehead, gently, and then pushed him with her light. Jace flew backward through the hall, past the open dock, out of the ship, and into his shuttle. The door slammed shut. Jace shouted her name. Liari turned to the clones, now human, now alive. She looked at the AI. No more cages, and then she opened her arms. The fusion core detonated. A bright light consumed the ship. Silent. Pure. Hours later, Jace sat on Earth's surface, staring at the sky. There was no wreckage, no trace of the ship, no signal. Just quiet. A garden bloomed nearby. Wildflowers growing from red dirt. He stood. He walked to the edge of a hill. And there, sitting on a rock, was a young girl. Her skin softly glowed. Her eyes held stars. She looked up at him. "Hi," she said. I remember you." His heart stopped. "Liari." She smiled. "No, not exactly. But maybe a little piece of her still lives." He stepped forward. She held out her hand. And for the first time, in a long, long time, Jace smiled.